So as I mentioned, second part of our topic around design thinking. And this time we're focusing in on the idea around how does design thinking and the Agile methodology work together. And we in the Digital Accelerator here in Global IT in Novo Nordisk, we've been working a lot within an Agile mindset and Agile culture, but also introducing design thinking into how we build our products and how we understand our user needs. So before we go any further, I'd like to invite Peter back. He is one of our user experience designers in the Digital Accelerator to talk a little bit about how we've been working with design thinking and Agile in the context of our digital lighthouses. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, about a meter apart here. Hi, everybody. And welcome back to you who also were joining us last time. A brief introduction to myself, design thinker and a user experience designer in product supply. I sit in the middle of a factory trying to digitize the factory by involving the users, basically. And last time we just briefly talked about how we use design thinking in product supply and in Digital Accelerator. Today I'm going to give you a even more brief, maybe, introduction to how we're actually going to we leverage all the knowledge we gain from using design thinking and how we actually deliver on what we promised the users. So design thinking is, as I'm stating here on the slide here, is that we, in the beginning, of course, we understand the users, we know their problems, and based on that, as a design thinker, you try to design a solution fit for that specific problem. Once you have done that, and once this is vetted by the golden triangle, so to speak, that all of you guys talked about with the viability, usability, and viability, desirability, and feasibility, you need to deliver, and we're using Agile to do that. And Agile is basically the best way to continuously deliver whatever you made sure and you promised the users that they would get. And you know that the business has signed off on, you know it's feasible, it's technical, doable, and you also know it has a high desirability. So we're using Agile and of course daily huddles and all what comes with the Agile methodology to actually deliver to the users. And we do that in sprints of variants from 2 to 3 weeks, but the users are fully on board and they know they don't get the Rolls Royce after iteration 1, but we get something out there and we get it done based on definition of done, of course. And then we're able to get a lot of user feedback, which we need in order to keep getting it, making it better and better and better, whatever we're designing for the users. So this is how we work in product supply and in Digital Accelerator. I will pass the ball on. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter. And now we're really excited to have Thomas and Julie back to join us. They were also part of part 1, but for those of you who have just joined for part 2, Thomas is a partner at the Trifork company Invokers, and he's been working with user-centered solution design and enterprise architecture for the past 22 years, facilitating plenty of design thinking workshops with large global enterprises. And Julie is a design thinking consultant at Trifork, where she's facilitated workshops with clients across different Trifork locations and markets. She's joining us from London this morning, and she has broad experience with design thinking applied across different digital innovation and business development opportunities. And over to you, Julie and Thomas.
All right, thank you very much, Sonia. So I'll just give you a brief talk through of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll give you a very short recap on the session last week. There is a recording from last week also, of course, so you can access that afterwards, and it will also be shared with you in the follow-up email. But after the recap, we will go into talking about what Agile is. We will compare the principles of Agile with the mindsets of design thinking. And then finally, we will look at the process of combining Agile and design thinking in product development. And then, of course, we will hopefully have time for some great questions in the end. So first, what we focused on last week was the core of design thinking, which is about understanding people and understanding the nature of the problem you're trying to solve before you move into solution mode. So we explored how design thinking is very valuable in making sure that you're building the right thing. And to build the right thing, you have to step away from the solution for a moment in order to explore the problem, to explore if the problem is real, and to know, to make sure that you fully understand it. And the first thing you want to do here with design thinking is to learn about your users. But as we also mentioned last week, it's not enough that you validate user desirability. To make a successful solution, you also have to make sure that it's technically feasible and that it's viable for the business. So you have to make sure that in your process, you have people covering all these different areas. So when we talk about the lenses of design thinking, we're talking about desirability, feasibility, and viability. And this was also what Peter was referring to in the beginning. Okay, but what is Agile? Why do we need Agile? And initially, I would like to ask you, how many of you have worked according to the waterfall project management methodology at some point and in some version of it? And feel free to share any experiences with it in the chat. So one of the challenges in traditional waterfall software management of software development is that the testing phase, as you can also see in this illustration, comes very late. So typically, a team of developers will spend weeks, months, sometimes even years building a new solution. And eventually, at some point, when they feel the product or the solution is done, they will throw it over the wall to a team of testers, and then they will then start testing if this is actually working or not, and if it's creating value. And in many cases, you will discover way too late that this is actually not what you have built. At this point, it's not something that is going to provide value for the users, or maybe it's not going to deliver on the expected business impact, or it's simply not technically feasible to operate and maintain. So we need another approach. And by looking at the illustration of just one of the Agile frameworks, it should be rather obvious that Agile is built on a much more iterative and collaborative approach. So in Agile, you're trying to take a problem and work on it iteratively. You want to break it down into steps. You want to work on those incrementally and get rapid feedback. So the key thing here is you're trying to build the solution right, and you acknowledge that change is inevitable. By the time you deliver your software, the landscape, the business needs, the customer needs, or maybe the technology can have changed. So you need to make sure that your approach allows for a quick and easily adapted product or solution. But what is Agile really about? The term Agile is being used a lot, and more and more organizations are becoming Agiles. And they're fueled by the hopes of getting higher employee engagement, more efficient product development cycles, and faster time to market. But a lot of organizations are falling short on their expectations. And why is that? So if we take a step back, Agile is a software development methodology built on the Agile manifesto created in 2001. I think today it's pretty hard to deny that it's quite efficient in making better software. But implementing an Agile framework in your organization without embracing and understanding the underlying principles, you might end up in a situation where your teams might be doing Agile, but they're not fully being Agile, or your organization is not fully being Agile. So until you embed the principles into your culture and fully understand them, you can't really improve your business agility or product development capabilities. So let's look into these principles of Agile. The first of them states that you want to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And maybe just to make a comment here, with these different principles that I'm mentioning, It's not to say that the things mentioned to the right is not important. It's just that we are valuing the elements to the left over the other elements. So the key message in this first one is that you need to focus on the people. They are the ones who respond to the needs, the business needs, the customer needs, and drive the development process. And if you focus too strongly on processes and tools, the team will be less responsive to change and probably also less likely to meet the needs of the business and the customers. The second principle here is working software over comprehensive documentation. So I guess we've probably all been part of projects where we had to do a lot of documentation, and it requires enormous amounts of time. And this is not to say that you shouldn't do documentation, you definitely should. And I know there are a lot of requirements, especially when you're developing medical products. But the key thing here is that you should only create relevant documentation and documentation that provides value. And don't let it become a barrier of progress and something that creates long delays in your development. The third principle is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And this is another area where there is a big contrast between the waterfall and the Agile methodology. So in the Agile method, we are encouraged to collaborate with the customers throughout the entire development process. And we thereby make it much more likely that we will actually meet the needs of the customers and that we can continuously adjust according to those needs. And this is very much what the fourth principle is about, responding to change over following a plan. So in traditional software development, change is typically regarded as an expense, something that you would like to avoid. In Agile, as I mentioned before, change is acknowledged as something that you cannot avoid and something that you actually welcome. You know that you will have to have your approach, an approach that will make you unable to quickly adjust according to changing environment. So even though Agile offers a set of these very important principles, it's important to acknowledge that it's not a silver bullet. And you want to make sure, as we mentioned in the beginning, that you're both building the right thing and building the thing right. So design thinking is a really valuable tool for making sure you're building the right thing. And then Agile is all about making sure that you take this thing and make it work very well and build it the right way. And this is where I will hand it over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Julia, for that part of the presentation. I'll take it from here for just to give you a spin on my point of view. So I'll start out with this, for some of you, maybe old quote. It says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," by Peter Drucker, a PhD guy, a very famous management consultant. It doesn't say that strategy isn't important. It basically says that culture is a very strong, powerful thing. So if you do not have your culture in place, you will have a hard time implementing your strategy. So I've tampered a bit with this quote and simply added "and process for lunch." So culture eats strategy for breakfast and process for lunch. And what do I mean by adding this extra little sentence? Well, it means that also in terms of implementing new processes, culture is extremely powerful. So if you don't have the right culture, in this case, when we talk about the Agile principles and what we will be looking at shortly, the mindsets of when we talk about design thinking, the case is that if you don't have the right mindset and the right principles in place, culture will reject the process. And it doesn't matter whether it's Agile, whether it's design thinking, whether it's lean startup or Google Sprint for that matter, culture will reject the process. So with that being said, let's have a look at and compare the Agile principles and the mindsets of design thinking. So let's try to connect the two. First of all, we had as Julia mentioned, the individuals and interactions over process and tools. Now, if we look at design thinking and have a similar mindset, we have something called human-centered. And what does that actually mean? Well, it means that you do not base your design on assumptions. So get out of the Eiffel Tower, get out into the field, and start to create your insights. And you create your insights through what's called empathy and applied curiosity, one could say. And what does empathy mean? Well, empathy means that you need to be out there in the right context with the users for whom you're trying to solve a problem. That's the only way that you can figure out and understand and feel with the users what the actual problems are. Furthermore, it's vital that you maintain a high level of curiosity. Curiosity is one of also the key elements in design thinking, and it's about asking questions. It's about understanding. It's about testing the environment that you are in. If we take the next one, connecting and comparing the two in terms of working software over comprehensive documentation. Now let's look at the mindset. We have two mindsets which fits pretty well to working software over comprehensive documentation, and that's bias towards action. Now, bias towards action is you as a designer, which spring into action whenever you, instead of leaning back, trying to document everything, sitting down, writing everything, you engage and are biased towards action, testing, showing, which is extremely important. And you do that, again, leaping on using the curiosity part. Another very important thing to remember here is prototyping. You need to use prototyping as a way of building your way forward. Innovation drives on prototyping. You might have assumptions, theses, whatever, but once you provide a prototype for end users, you get real feedback on your insights. And remember, prototypes can be down to a piece of paper with a set of Post-its on, illustrating what's going on a device, maybe moving a Post-it back and forth between two different piece of papers indicating two different devices. It could be, and I actually just pulled this down from the shelf. This is another prototype I've done from a project. It could be something running on a device, testing stuff out, but prototyping is a way of building your way forward, and you cannot actually do innovation without prototyping a lot. So let's go to the third one, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We have something called radical collaboration. And what does radical collaboration means is that we create what's called multidisciplinary teams. And as Julia initially started out saying, when we again touched upon feasibility, viability, and desirability, so that's basically shifting, having representatives both from viability, desirability, and feasibility. So that's the tech people, it's the business people, and it's the end users, and you in the middle facilitating this. And by having these multidisciplinary teams, you get multiple perspectives, and you can build on top of ideas generated out of different domains. Hence, you get a creative bolstering and generate confidence in coming up with new solutions based on that. It's very much about show, don't tell. So, and that means that you need to be very visual in what you do. You tell stories, you do storylines, you do storyboarding as such. Another really important element here is to look at what we call T-shaped people. Now, T-shaped people are people which are very skilled within one of the domains that is part of your team. But T-shaped means that even though they are very skilled within their domain, they have a kind of skill sets that enable them to look across different domains. So when you build upon ideas from other domains, you are able to actually link that together and generate new ideas from that. So having T-shaped people as part of your team is extremely important as well. So yes, let's see. Responding to change over following a plan. Now, there is something called mindful of the process. And I think this is also one of the very key elements of understanding what goes on when you are in a design mode. I guess, as Julia mentioned early on in the presentation, most of you have most likely been part of this agile transformation, getting that into your organization more and more. But you most likely have also encountered, as you've gone along with this journey, that it is a transformation. And in many projects that I have been a part of, it actually means that starting up here, you were in the beginning of using Agile. It became like a part of still a waterfall model. So you were told by the project manager that from A to B, you can be as agile as you want, but once that is done, you have to deliver X, Y, Z. And the product were more or less defined by default in the beginning. And Gartner actually came up with a pretty interesting term around this. They called it, I think it was called agile but. And the problem is that when you mix that up too much, you actually get the worst out of both the things. So, and I could actually transfer that in to design thinking and say design thinking but at the same time. So mixing it up gives you quite some challenges. So it's very important to be very mindful about the process, knowing exactly where you are in the project, knowing which tool to use, whether you are diverging or converging. Another example here is that if you have too many like-minded people in your team, it can become a problem to generate a lot of ideas. And you need to trust that when you engage in a design thinking project, you need to trust in the expertise. So because you design in many cases based on an objective, which actually means that sometimes it's actually pretty difficult to, I know that from many projects that you want to define a predefined set of a statement of a work order, for instance, where you have all the statements and all what needs to be delivered there. But it's the nature of design thinking that you, when you engage trying to solve a challenge, you many times need to reframe your challenge, right? Because through empathy, you get out there, you get new insights, and then suddenly you will have to sort of do some reframing, simply because you get new insights. And that is something that from a culture perspective, you need to be aware of and be able to embrace. So that's another thing which is really important to be very aware of that can happen. Yes, so basically summing it all up, we have touched upon this human centricity. So make sure empathy is there. Be curious, bias towards action, spring into action, test stuff, be curious, ask questions over and over again. Have a culture of prototyping, and prototyping can be so many things. Do radical collaboration. So you need to be aware of having representatives from different domains. And furthermore, it's important to be mindful of the process as such. Yeah, so that's basically a quick go through of our core mindsets of design thinking. And as you can see, they interlink pretty well with the principles from Agile. And connecting those two actually give us some additional power, so to speak. So by aligning Agile with design thinking and bringing them together, it actually enables what you could call evolutionary design. And later on in this presentation, we'll just take a quick look at the process and how we sort of generate this evolutionary design way of going ahead. So over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Thomas. So a quick jump back to last week again, where we talked about diamonds. And I don't know how many of you was with us last week, and how many of you remember what the diamonds are about. But more specifically, we talked about the double diamond process and how it can help you be guided towards building the right thing. And the important thing about the diamond shapes here is that it represents two important things, or two important modes of design thinking, namely the diverging and converging. And by focusing on both divergent and convergent thinking throughout your entire process, you'll get the advantage of exploring a wide net of ideas before you narrow it down to what's the most important. And understanding these two modes of thinking will set a strong foundation for your work, for your process. And it's interesting to see that some people will thrive very much in the diverging space, and some people thrive more in the converging space. And it's important that you have a strong facilitator that can create trust and safety throughout the entire process and make sure that people are comfortable and that they stay with the process. So what Thomas also mentioned, that you're very mindful of the process and the process that you're working through. So to add another element to the double diamond, we will introduce the cone of uncertainty. And some of you might be familiar with this term. What it's basically about is that uncertainty throughout your project or product development lifecycle will decrease. So when you initially kick off your project or you start working on an idea, this is where you have a high amount of uncertainty and a high amount of risk. So what you want here is to have a systematic way of reducing that uncertainty and reducing the risk. And to tie that back to design thinking, you want to, or this is about 3 different areas, so the 3 different areas of design thinking. So you will have uncertainty related to your customers, and here you want to validate your desirability hypotheses. So is this user real? Is this customer real? Do this customer or this user actually have this problem, these pain points, these needs? Are they interested in the way that we would like to solve it? And then you also want to work on your implementation uncertainties. And here it's about validating your feasibility hypotheses. So backstage, can we manage the technology? Can we make this product work? Can we build it at scale? Finally, you want to uncover the uncertainties related to your business opportunities and business impact, which is about validating your viability hypotheses. So can I earn more money or generate more value from this that it will cost to build? And can I build a sustainable business model around it? By using design thinking at the early stage and the start of your project, you will have a greater chance of actually reducing the uncertainty much faster. But as this model also illustrates, you will have to perform a lot of experiments and exercises of diverging and converging throughout the process. But you will also have to acknowledge that the risk and the uncertainty will become lower as you work yourself through the process. And I know that you're going to tell us a little more about this, Thomas, so I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, let's try to do a quick deep dive and add some additional information to this. Now, as we stated before, the principles of Agile and the principles of design thinking goes very well in hand. And when you want to master the cone of uncertainty, we start out initially when we want to do all the concept design part, right? So if we remember a little bit what we talked about the last time, is that in this case you are on a level where you are testing out a set of theses, more than one. You might you're on a level where if it's on a platform level, you have the ability to identify a number of theses that you actually want to work on. So this is where you generate your concept. You have an idea potentially of a platform. You want to deliver a number of services or products on top of this platform for various target groups. So this is where you work within your conceptual design part. And we do diverge, converge, diverge. So we do the double diamond here as well and run through the design thinking process, being mindful of the process, of course. So it's all about identifying the right thing to build. Now, coming out of the concept design, you want to test out because you have validated maybe one or two products or services that you want to deep dive on. You want to start identifying how you could implement and start running and building this potential product or service. So now you deep dive on your thesis or the initial product or service that you had identified. So basically this is your value proposition that you start out with. So again, using yet you would run now another iteration to identify the right things to build in terms of that specific product or service. Again, adhere to the design thinking process as you move along. Once that is over, you want to start building this. And a good way, as we've touched upon, as Peter mentioned initially, how it goes on also at Novo, and I guess most of you out there are familiar with, Agile is a very potent way of start getting moving and start getting value out of what it is you intend to build. But see, you want to iterate as you go when you are running in an agile setup, and you want to ensure that your product backlog is constantly being filled with relevant information, having your, for instance, product owner capable of prioritizing constantly based on value and other parameters in terms of what goes into your backlog. At the same time, you use design thinking as your, how should I put it, your forward-looking long-distance radar, so to speak. So because you know that looking down the road in the future, you have identified initially a roadmap. So you want to identify potential challenges, problems, and you want to solve them before they end up in a more detailed manner into your product backlog. So now you enter what we could call evolutionary design. So you have your design thinking with your designers and your team, your multidisciplinary team, running ahead using design thinking as your forward-looking long-distance radar to work with potential problems and issues and having the design that relates to and can go into your backlog once you enter a more agile setup and wanting to build it. So by combining these two, you are actually able to, build and identify the right thing the right way. Yeah. And we have these separate steps.
So I think maybe just an important point also to highlight with this process is that you want to spread out your investment. So you don't want to just have a huge investment upfront, but you want to have small investment throughout your life cycle and throughout after you have released the first product. You want to make sure that you have investments to continue the innovation and continue developing on top of that. And in these different double diamonds, there can be a lot of different smaller exercises of diverting and converting. So there can of course be a lot of smaller diamonds inside these as well.
Yeah, sure. So trying to come full circle, we started out initially with talking a bit about culture, how culture actually potentially can eat our process for lunch. So what is it that we need to be very much aware of from an individual perspective and from an organizational perspective? We need initially to make sure that that the people being part of your project understand the conceptual framework. So they need to know the details around design thinking and of course agile in this as well. And you need to, because this is something I've seen so many times, that you need to embrace failure, right? So we do a lot of prototyping and basically we aim for failure, so to speak, because we need to find out where we are missing insights so we can build on that knowledge. And it's a thing for us here in Europe especially, and I also know in the States that we basically don't want to fail, right? So when we are asked a question, we want to come up with the answer right away, instead of taking one step back and open up and see what other opportunities are there. Maybe there are other ways of actually solving the problem we are set out to actually solve. So, but it's a hard thing for many people to embrace failure. But it's part of design thinking to get smarter, get insights and whatnot, and use that as a way on which you can build your way forward. And then furthermore, it's extremely important that you practice, practice, and practice, especially also together with your team. So it's make sure that when you start out on the journey, if it's just now you're starting out here, make sure that you start with projects that has a certain limited size that gives you the feeling and understanding of actually creating a success and building on top of this success. Be very much be aware of not initiating and engaging in huge projects right away, but trying to understand and practice all the things within design thinking and understanding the mindset. And be selective of the team members and the way they are formed. It's important that we have a multidisciplinary team. It's important that it doesn't consist of only like-minded people, because we have a tendency when we do that yeah, whatever, we just do as we always do, and then simply neglecting and actually not being mindful of the process as such. If we look a little bit about on an organizational level, it's important to make sure that the person driving the team is an influencer. And why is this important? Well, it's important because your team in many cases, as we talked about before, is a multidisciplinary team. So once you enter sort of the middle management layer or even higher. The essence is that the resources or the people being part of your team comes from different organizational units. And when you maneuver in that layer, it's important that you have people that are well known and can maneuver in that space. I've even heard it being called the killing zone. So it's very important to have people that are influencers and know how to move and navigate in that space. And then it's important to get air cover from sea level, because you as a team, and now we are talking about in your early days of starting up design thinking as part of your ways of working, it's important to have air cover, because your team will be navigating your organization differently than what you normally would do. Hence, it's important to have authority as part of your air cover, so to speak, to move forward. And then try to co-locate if it's doable at all. And I know in these Corona times, everything's is quite different, and yeah, you could also call that co-locate, right? So we are sitting in front of screens alone, but under normal circumstances, try to co-locate so your team sits together constantly, because if it's a multidisciplinary team, and there is this tendency that engineers eat their lunch with other engineers and business people. So try to bring the people together and create the team you wanna that needs to go the long mile to deliver on design thinking. Be aware of the semantic gaps as well. And what does that mean? Well, within your team, just the word like prototyping can actually mean quite a different thing depending on who you are. So be aware of these semantic gaps, that if you're an engineer, in many cases, a prototype is something that is full up, working, ready to be tested, whatever. As when we talk about prototypes, it can be even just two pieces of paper, right? Or as I showed you before, some Lego stuff and whatever. So that's very important. And finally, before we move on, it's important to be aware of conceptual blocks, because for many companies we built up processes around how to operate and work with ideas, and having these conceptual blocks there give you a lot of constraints on actually how to move forward. So yeah, we have a process. If you come up with an idea, it has to move through this kind of process, right? So we can't do that. Or you wanna engage with end users doing empathy, and then the only way you can do that is that you have to have 3 other people with you because they also want to know what's going on. And suddenly you are there trying to get all the insights when you do your interviewing with empathy and everything. And the poor guy that you are interviewing are sort of being watched by 6 other people, and that's a problem. So that is an example of a conceptual blocks or blocker, because that's the way we normally would do it, and that's the culture here in our company. So be aware of that. Yeah. So if you want to learn more, this was just skipping the surface very, very quickly, but we have 2 master classes, one foundation class and another one in 4 days talking about this, and you will get to know much more, of course, in details about design thinking and whatnot in this digital space.